welcome into the Gramlich and Mac Lane podcast presented by Ingles. Mac, we're back with our ACC after further review, and it's time to talk about Clemson. And of course, we're going to have the legend Larry Williams on. I have to preface this. I am not wearing this outfit the entire time. Mac and I were done. Mac had a meeting, and then he goes, "Hey, do you want to record this intro real quick?" I said, "Sure." I was about to go on a walk. I don't know why, because it's 20 0 degrees outside, but here I am, Mac. So I'm braving the elements. Hello.
Honestly, I would not have been mad if you're giving us a walk and talk intro as you're getting it and getting after
as I'm
it.
freezing.
So, yeah, maybe for next time we can try to expand our horizons. But actually, you match Larry, aka Slim Shady, which you guys will see in a second. So I don't know why Larry just doesn't turn the heat on in whatever room he does these episodes from, but he layers up to join us, which we're always grateful for his insight and his time. And you'll hear me say this, but Larry and I actually did a podcast where we talked all about the new defensive coordinator hire and all those different things. So if you want more of that after you watch this, be sure to check that out if you haven't already. But always great time with Larry. He is one of the best. And you know who also is the best is Roback, KG. I am just so in love with their workout stuff. It has helped me get stronger, faster, bigger. So just if you want all of those things, go to Roback, use our code GMPOD, and layer it up. If you didn't get what you want for Christmas, listen, it's almost February. If you're still mad about that, take life into your own hands and go do it yourself.
Right. You can't wait on other people. All right. Sometimes other people aren't going to get you the gifts you want, and you got to treat yourself. So use our code. That's exactly right, Mac. And yeah, get multiple layers because it's so cold outside. Exactly. You're going to need them. So shout out Roback. Use our code GMPOD for 20% off. And we'll also get to a message from Ingles later on. But I'm getting my tea. I'm going hot tea right now, Mac. It's that cold. Great. It's like coffee doesn't even do the job. I need to be standing over a fire, warming myself with some tea. So that's where we are. It's just tough times out here, Mac.
It is fun. It is fun. So anyway, real quick message. Let's get to our good friend, Larry Williams. Larry Williams, great to see you, brother. Welcome back to the podcast. Clemson fans are probably wondering what took so long. Why is this just now happening? And well, we were waiting on Clemson to announce some news and to make some changes, and they finally did. So it's kind of their fault why this has taken so long. We wanted to be sure we had everything up to date and ready. But great to see you, Larry. Thank you for joining us, brother.
Y'all too. And I think the last time I joined y'all, it was extremely cold then too, and I was wearing one of these. So you can insert a joke about it'd be a cold day in hell before we have Larry Williams in our.
There you go. Or I was just going to say we're glad to have Slim Shady back. So either way, whichever one you want to take.
It's pretty cold down here in Mom's basement. So.
Right. Of course. Yeah, I hear you on that, Larry. It is freezing outside. I don't know what to do with myself. But Larry, this season as a whole, I'm just going to start with the big question, Mac, and then we're going to get into kind of quarter by quarter of the season, like what happened. But overall, Mac and I disagree. So I would say if you said Clemson overachieved, underachieved, or met expectations, I would say underachieved. Now, you might say, oh my God, Kelly, they made the playoff. But they backdoored their way to the playoff. And I would argue that any year that you lose 2 home games, and any year that you lose to South Carolina is an underachievement. Now, Ohio State's trying to mess that up for me because they lost to Michigan and won the national championship. So obviously it's not an underachievement. But Larry, what do you think? Where would you characterize this season?
I know this probably doesn't fit the TV/internet. Got to have a take, one sentence take, yes or no. I just think it's really complicated, And I think you have to include the defensive regression, I guess, or decline. But you also have to include what we saw out of Cade Klubnik and those receivers in the last game against a really good and even great defense. That's the way I look at it. I'll say this, and stop me if I get too long-winded here. And I guess I'm filibustering, but it struck me the other day, like how much would be different over the last 7-8 weeks had Fran Brown and Syracuse not orchestrated that favor.
Great point.
I mean, not saying that, you know, Clemson still couldn't have, you know, um, shifted the narrative on the portal and all that, and not saying they wouldn't have been able to retain a lot of their big ticket players. But I don't know, like, as far as the retention part, I mean, I think a big part of the retention was getting to the ACC championship and winning it and actually showing promise, even though you lost by 2 touchdowns against Texas. So anyway, I mean, I think that it's hard for me to separate was it or was it not a successful season from where are things right now on January 21st? You know, because it feels like the trajectory is pointed up. And so, but again, you mentioned 2 home losses. You get routed by Louisville at night in Death Valley, and then you let Linares Sellers run wild on November 30th. So if somebody wants to say it was not a success, I would not disagree. I would not argue with that. I just think there are so many variables, and it depends on how you define it.
Yeah.
I just sort of tie a lot to what has happened over the last 7 weeks. You know, what we saw in Austin, and the fact that the only bad thing, even though it was a really bad thing that we saw in Austin, has been addressed in a very resounding way. I just always look at sort of what are the state of things right now. So, but to your point, Kelly, they did back in, they did earn it, but they earned it with a pretty weak schedule, you know.
And a lot of help. Like, to your point with Syracuse, it's crazy what happened with that. I mean, Mac, would you say, like, if Syracuse hadn't beaten Miami and Clemson doesn't make the ACC championship and doesn't make the playoff, would your answer change?
Yeah, for 100%. And I think
so it's all about Syracuse. It's all about Syracuse today on the pod.
It still happened, and you know, they still had to go beat an undefeated ACC SMU. I mean, that, you know, they had to earn it that way. But when Larry said that, I was kind of like, we would be depressed if that didn't happen. I mean, you know, all those feelings of Cade Klubnik sitting in his car for hours and me like in the studio just like this.
You doing the same.
Like, I hate doing, like, I'm about to have to do TV for the next whatever hours, and then 3 hours later it's overjoyed and you're excited. So that Larry, is a fascinating way to kind of ponder, you know, what if you will, kind of a little Marvel series there, just on how differently these last 6-7 weeks would have gone. Would there be more changes? Would there be even more, you know, cleaning house and having to, you know, restart certain places? I don't know. But thank God it didn't. And here we are. I'm kind of with you. I feel so much better about where things can be when you look at all the retention, when you look at playing in the transfer portal and bringing in Tom Allen, who at first I was kind of like, I don't know if I like it. And since then, and you do more research and hear him talk and things of that nature, you're like, how did we not know this was the guy that Coach Sweeney was going to go get?
Yeah, true. Another thing I would point out as we're trying to define success or whatever of 2024, we have to take ourselves, don't we, back to the summer, last off season, and even the trip from Atlanta on August 31st, and what we were thinking about Cade Klubnik.
Yeah.
Because it was like, oh boy, it's the same stuff here, and what are they going to do? And, you know, and what he showed over the last, you know, in some key situations, you know, and you look at South Carolina, and it's another example of how quickly perceptions can change, because walking out of that game and the week leading into the ACC championship, it was like, okay, you know, maybe there should be some scrutiny on Garrett Riley here, you know, as year 2, and they scored 14 points, you know, in that game. And really, what has he done against, you know, high-level top 25 defenses?
Right.
Well, then they, you know, you go to Charlotte, and he does some really creative things, and then of course they're able to do what they did against Texas. But so I just there's I don't know. I just think you have to look more deeply at it. And
Right.
Cade, like, I think if you just let's take that South Carolina game. Yeah, Cade made the biggest mistake of the game, and it was very reminiscent of his big mistakes in 2023. And yes, he missed Wesco on a big throw, or third down throw, deep in his own territory in the third quarter. Yes, he missed Wesco. I guess it was in the second quarter when he was wide open behind the defense. But then ask yourself, would they have even been in position to win that game without Cade Klubnik?
Right.
No way. No
Yeah.
way. Like, Klubnik was really good
Yeah.
in that game, I thought. They just couldn't close the deal. And then you can get into the whole craziness with we're getting a little too deep into the weeds here, but the whole craziness of the Maffa fumble and then the whistle blowing when the ball is in the air on the next play. The snake bites both ways, and everybody suffers from bad calls. But anyway, those are things you think about as you're evaluating Klubnik and where they stand right now.
Yeah, and I think another interesting thing, Larry, that you brought up, kind of when you're deciphering how to judge this season and all the different things, I thought from a production standpoint, the season would have been reversed. I thought that the defense was yet again going to have to carry the load and put Clemson in some really good positions, and that Clemson was going to run the ball effectively, and then maybe the passing would come along. And it was the opposite. I mean, Cade Klubnik took so many great strides forward. Try to kind of spin this little positive right here. With his growth, I didn't know if he could get to that point. We knew physically he had it. Like there were moments of brilliance in the 2 years that we saw him before when he really got to be the starter and things of that nature. But you just didn't know, could it translate mentally? Could it translate leadership? Could it translate of I'm the guy, everybody follow me? And it absolutely did. So maybe outside of the physical things, the passing and his awareness, pocket presence, using his legs, was there anything else in your covering of Clemson that you saw, man, this guy is different this year, really impressive to see?
Yeah, I just think it was rising to the moments. And you said not physical things, but the physical things are what really jump out to me the most.
Yeah.
And even like in the immediate aftermath of the Pittsburgh game, I was kind of negative just in my mind, like, God, Pittsburgh offensive line is terrible, and is it really that big of an accomplishment to beat those guys in that type of game? And yeah, Cade had a huge run, obviously, at the end, but then a few weeks later, I think as I'm preparing for the playoffs game, I went back and looked at some of his throws from the end zone angle at Pittsburgh, and holy smokes, like NFL throws. That's where you really get the true indication of the velocity and just how much he's whipping it, those opposite hash throws. And of course, that continued against Texas. But those are the things that stand out to me, is just that pocket awareness. And you asked me to talk about things other than that, but I guess you would have to, you would have to, you would have to credit his mental development, and I think back, you're talking about the notions that we had last off season and the assumptions that we had, that we all had. And it was, they just need Cade Klubnik to be really good. They don't need him to be great. They don't need him to be Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson. And that was based on the assumption that the defense was going to be really good.
Right.
And so we were obviously all wrong on that. But I just think that, the fact that he was able to just, build on some of the experience that he had last season. And, early on, when he's doing it against Appalachian State, NC State, Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, you're like, okay, yeah, he looks good, but, so I don't think he made his biggest strides until late in the year. And the fact that, you didn't have a dominant defense on the other side put more on his shoulders to make those game turning plays.
Yeah, I mean, you think about how he looked against Georgia and then how he looked against Texas. It's like two different people.
Yeah.
Just incredible the growth that he made, and now Heisman favorite, Heisman candidate for next year. And like you said, it's hard to separate how we feel right now about the future compared to the season. But let's use, sorry, Clemson fans, let's use the Louisville game to kind of discuss this defense as a whole, because yes, Clemson's offense didn't play great in the Louisville game, but you give up 33 points at home. You give up 150 yards to true freshman Isaac Brown, who is a really good player, but still, it's alarming. And it just felt like you couldn't stop Louisville at all. So overall, Larry, how much of this defense was the play caller and, of course, Wes Goodwin, who has been relieved of his duties, and how much of it was just players not really living up to what we thought they would be? Like, how do you evaluate what happened with his defense?
I think it's all intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when you have a leader who, he doesn't command the room, and I think there was plenty of respect for Wes Goodwin. I don't think the football building was like, oh, this guy's terrible and doesn't know anything. But it just was weird to me, and it even goes back to 2023 when Dabo was taking such an active role with the defense in practices and even in games. We were all able to see that. And then, pre-Louisville game this past season, there was a tendency to say, okay, yeah, they're giving up this many rushing yards a game, but that's because of garbage time. There's so much garbage time. And even in that moment, I'm like, y'all, I don't know. Because Stanford went up and down the field in the first half of that game. That was not garbage time. And that wasn't a very good Stanford offense. They were pushing them around. So, I mean, even for, the week before that Louisville game, actually 2 weeks before, because they had an open date, when Virginia came to town, Virginia didn't have a lot of success running the ball, but I thought it was really interesting. The first play they ran out of the gates was they ran right at that sort of soft edge, like an outside run. And then the first play they ran in the second half was the same play. And so, Eric, you can speak to this. That's just not some random play call. That is Tony Elliott and the offensive brain trust saying, we think they have a weakness there. And of course, that weakness didn't really show up in that game against inferior talent. But when you bring in Louisville, which has much more comparable talent, I'll tell you what really stood out to me and what spoke larger truths in the aftermath of that Louisville game is in the press conference, I asked Dabo, and I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact thing I asked, but I said, you've been concerned for most of the season about y'all's edge setting issues and also y'all's tackling. And he sort of interrupted me, but he's like, yep. And so, I thought that really was revealing because, there are times when Dabo, he'll be like, it's just one game, y'all. I mean, come on, everybody has a bad game. Just chill out. But his body language in that sort of snapshot to me, I'm like, I think Dabo thinks or knows there are some real issues here. And I'm certainly not saying that, some people out there say that's when Dabo decided Wes was gone. I don't know that. I mean, he could have. But that's just when it, sort of told me that there might be some changes coming after the season. And then after the fourth quarter against South Carolina, when I asked Dabo a day later about taking Sammy off the field and going small, and he said, yeah, it's coach's decision. We wanted to have more speed on the field. Coach's decision. Doesn't mean it was the right decision, but da-da-da-da-da. So that's a bit of an eye-opener. And then a couple of weeks later, I was able to ask Wes Goodwin directly, hey, I just wanted to get you to expand on that decision since we haven't been able to ask you since then. And he said it was to because they knew South Carolina was going to come with more quarterback run, and so they did that for that reason. And I was I'm not a I'm not a football guy. Maybe I'm sure there are some reasons you can articulate to defend that. But South Carolina's a big team, and they were hammering that right side with quarterback powers, quarterback counters. So I don't really understand. I don't. Maybe somebody can help me understand the philosophical move of going smaller to combat South Carolina. Eric's laughing, and I guess Anyway, going. I just there was something off for most of the year. Oh, and let's go back to the Georgia game. Speaking of assumptions we had in the moment that are now we know more. Georgia's offense wasn't that good. And they were going up and down the field. They ran the ball for a season high in rushing yards and yards per carry. And at the time, you're like, oh, 100 and whatever, 60 yards. That's pretty good against Georgia, and 6 point whatever yards a carry. Not ideal, but okay. But it turns out, there was some confusion in that opening game against Georgia at the second and third levels that you're just like, man, that something's kind of. We just know more now, and it informs us a lot more now as to the progression or the regression of the defense.
Yeah, I think the to tag along to some of the interesting comments, I think it was probably the Louisville game, where someone asked about exactly how KG kind of just asked there, is it the talent or is it the coaching? And he said, we have plenty of talent. I love the talent. And he kind of head on directed and went after that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's telling. And again, I don't remember when exactly that happened, but that's kind of when my flags were going up. There's probably going to be a change here in the near future, and there ended up being. All right, I'm trying to get away from the sad stuff. KG, you keep pulling us back down the sad rabbit hole.
Do you want to do another segment that praising Syracuse? Because that's really.
Well, what I want to praise is these superstar All-American freshman wide receivers. That's what I want to praise because they were a revelation, Larry, and it's fascinating. What's interesting to me, and this is something I've learned as an analyst and, certainly as a Clemson homer, is I can't just go to Clemson's camp and really get a grasp on who Clemson's going to be. Because, and this is for every team, it's not just Clemson. All I see at your camp practice is you going against you. So if your offense looks really good, that might be an indication your defense is terrible. If your defense looks really good, that might be an indication your offense isn't going to be that great. So it really is hard to tell in practice what you think. But one thing that was clear was 12-1 were good, and those guys were ready. And so it was funny going into the Georgia game. I'm like, okay, these guys are going to get an opportunity, and they really didn't. They played very sparingly, and other guys that got to start had a lot of drops. Had a lot of mistakes, not a lot of separation. And I'm just sitting there, that's why I'm bald, pulling my hair out watching this game, thinking, why are we not giving these guys a chance? Put them in the game. And so that's what, I remember KG doing this podcast, begging for against App State. Bryant Wesco needs to start. It's his turn. Sorry it didn't work out. Love you guys, whoever that was. He's the guy now. I've seen it before, done it with Sammy Watkins and other guys. It's just what you have to do. And he did. And Larry, I'd be darned if I'm not standing on the field and the first play of the game is not a bomb to Bryant Wesco. And I'm just sitting there looking at it fly through the air. I'm like, this is what I was talking about. And then he catches it and scores. So what was it like seeing that emergence? And, just throughout the season, they really went back and forth. Bryant had that unbelievable ACC championship game. Of course, TJ throughout the season had his ups, and I think Texas was a great exclamation point for him. So what did you see from those two specifically, and then maybe just the wide receiver pass catching room in general?
I'll say this, just in fairness, you're referring to the Georgia game and why they didn't play, and then a week later it's, wow, such a revelation. Appalachian State's safeties were not Malachi Starks and KJ Bolden, I remember even in the moment,
hey, guess what? We'll never know, Larry. We'll never know.
We'll never know. I remember even after the Appalachian State game, I'm like, holy crap, that safety just totally misplayed. It was slow, And then even, I remember later in the season, I forgot who it was against, but they were in the same play, basically the same play to Wesco, and the safety it gets over there and breaks up the pass. Dabo in the past, Deshaun Watson in Athens in 2014 he drew an enormous amount of criticism, but I sort of look at it both ways, and I think what you didn't want with Deshaun Watson, who was very small at the time, you didn't want him getting broken in half, suffering injury, but most important, you didn't want his confidence to be shattered for the rest of the season. And I can sort of look at Wesco and Moore, they still had growing pains. It still took them a while. They were different looking players toward the end of the year than they were even, against these tomato cans that followed the Georgia game. Wesco suffered that injury. TJ Moore had to learn to play without the ball. But I think the important part, as we sit here right now, is you look at the South Carolina, the ACC championship game, and of course the Texas game. Those dudes and Cade Klubnik are giving Clemson what it used to have in terms of, you throw those opposite hash corner routes, and they can do it almost in their sleep. The way they did with Mike Williams and T. Higgins and others, and that's what over the previous 3 years it's like, holy smokes, like why are they trying to throw these same 50-50 sideline balls to Spector, when he's not that type of athlete.
Right.
Nothing against Brandon Spector, but that is lethal. Like, and throwing and catching is still, that is still a key part of the ingredient. I mean, obviously, college football in the last few years has shown us that the formula for winning a national title isn't necessarily generational quarterback throw into generational receivers, because we've seen sort of a dip in quarterback play from the generational to just really good. Stetson Bennett, J.J. McCarthy, Will Howard last night. Those weren't elite, generational quarterbacks. Really good, obviously. You've seen the importance of defense, because Georgia was just a rampaging defense when it won its 2 titles. Michigan, of course, last year was just filthy on the defensive side of the ball. And then Ohio State, was the top defense in the country statistically. But my point is, I guess, is that it's still an evolving thing. The formula can change. And so next season, we could very well be sitting here going, wow, the Clemson's passing game is unstoppable, and that's why they are wherever they are. Whatever you want to say. In the Final Four, would that be is that where the bar of achievement is sort of defined at now compared to, between 15 and 20, it was, just getting to the playoff, that's a birthright. And, and the standard was winning a national title. But just anyway, what we saw toward the end of the season, and I think even we saw it against South Carolina, but the despair and devastation was just so thick that following week that people just really weren't paying much attention to that. But that was one of the main reasons I picked Clemson to win the ACC championship when most others were picking SMU, because I'm like, y'all, this passing game is growing, and Wesco and Moore, they really, I think, after that Pittsburgh game, you had sort of the open date, so to speak, with the Citadel game. They were able to sort of get healthier, take a deep breath, and, bring their best in those last 3 games.
Yeah, which they definitely did. Larry, I want to kind of look ahead, because we've touched on SMU, we touched on the Texas game. You have been covering Clemson for a long time. You've been, through the whole Dabo's not going to use the portal situation. What was your reaction when Dabo finally went to the portal? I'm trying to remember if it was the wide receiver or the kid from Purdue first. I know you can. Okay, the receiver. Yeah. So did you like hear rumblings of this coming? Like what was your reaction to this?
Definitely heard rumblings of it coming, and we actually wrote about it maybe late November, early December. Um, basically the people I talk to, I ask somebody, hey, this is in early December, actually the week before the South Carolina game, when it was shared to me like, hey man, stuff's going to change. We've got money budgeted for a big time defensive end, and so I'm like, okay, but you're still like, okay, is Dabo going to is going to follow through and do it, um, and so at the time, when they got Smith out of nowhere, out of the blue, I reacted like, okay, yep, time to retire the ESPN graphic of Dabo of Dabo standing out, the bouncer outside the club, which I love. I just thought that was hilarious, by the way. And people are like, "Come on, man, it's a freaking really that counts as a transfer, blah blah blah." And I'm like, I think there's more coming here, And at the time, my over under was for portal acquisitions this offseason was 3.5, and at the time, it's like, get freaking real, So they're at 3, and so we'll see. We still got a whole other cycle coming. I think I might take the over. That's not based on any specific intel that I have, but no, I think they made a mistake a year ago. And I think a lot of people could see, okay, you got an issue here at defensive end if you're having to move your stud tackle outside,
Exactly.
even though that stud tackle can be really good outside. It came back to bite him. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah,
I
and I think there's also less, I guess, leeway, even though, I mean, what happens? Nothing happens, but there's less leeway or more for criticism because you do have the transfer portal. It's not like, oh, well, these guys just aren't ready. We got to wait for them to. No, man, you can go out and solve those problems. It's just, are you going to do it? And they clearly showed that they will and are. Now, and I'm interested too with Tom Allen coming in, which Larry, you and I did a whole discussion of that. If you guys want to go check that out on Larry's podcast, but with the addition of him, are there going to be any Penn State guys that want to follow the leader and come down? Are there anybody from Indiana or wherever they might have transferred that played for him that are really good players that, hey, yeah, I want to be back with this guy? And,
players,
is there opportunity? Yeah, players that are wanting to transfer with him.
Yeah, I thought you meant coaches. I don't know, honestly.
Yeah.
I just do not really closely monitor the recruiting and portal pursuits or whatever. Or our guy Paul Strelo does a tremendous job of that. So I will fully defer to. I just don't know. I know that's not something I learned years ago was just don't pretend like you know what you're doing.
That's right. That's right.
I can sit here
more so just addressing you saying there's another window coming since the window is closed. New stuff has happened. I assume that could be a new, kind of pot that you never even had before that now you do. Will be fascinating to see kind of what they do there. Looking at Clemson's schedule for next year, obviously you open with LSU coming to the Valley. Cannot wait. Going to be amazing. There's a lot of expectation, with LSU and some of the pieces they have coming back. They're also losing a lot of guys. Not saying we're trying to predict that game or anything of that nature right now. But when you look at Clemson, who all they were able to retain, the fact that you arguably have the best, if not one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming back, the growth from the offense, and now this new look defense, what are your expectations for the Tigers in 25?
Well, I mean, it has to be. I mean, I hate to get too referendum-y, because wasn't this past season supposed to be a referendum?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
but also, don't be afraid to just say national championship. It's all good. It's early.
I mean, this past season was supposed to be a referendum. The Georgia game was supposed to be a referendum.
Right.
Lost to Georgia, lost to South Carolina, lost at home to Louisville, like you said, and they're doing okay. Dabo's model seems to be doing okay, and he's to his credit, he's made some adjustments. I would say post 25 is dicey just because of their current
Sure.
recruiting class. I think that's more than fair
Sure. And
to
quarterback
say.
situation.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, the schedule looks potentially very difficult, and I mean, you always have to underscore or highlight potentially, because even going into this past season, teams that you thought were going to be good weren't really that
Right.
good, and it's
Right.
kind of a fluid situation. But no, I think, and again, not saying they have to do this, but you have what you need on offense. Um, all these guys returned. I mean, I think that's one of the sad, not sad, but one of the unfortunate sort of casualties of this endless defensive coordinator search and this endless um, um, sort of non-decision, non-publicizing of the fact that Wes Goodwin was out of a job.
Mhm.
It took the focus so much off of, holy crap, this laundry list of important players is bam, 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 re-upping.
Yeah, coming
And
back.
that is a very big deal. And you just look at Ohio State. You know, people, of course, make a big deal of the acquisitions they got, and they were, of course, important. But really, the foundation for their national championship is a ton of, not a ton, but an abnormal number of guys who could have gone to the NFL, who would normally have gone to the NFL, re-upping and saying, I want to come back. And of course, money was a part of that. Of course, money was a part of Clemson's big ticket guys coming back. But who knows where things are headed in college football? It's hard to even make, ironclad statements. But I think it's very fair to say, all right, Clemson, this is the year,
Right.
And I don't want to say this is the year to win it all, because man, that's just, it's a different
It's hard to
ballgame.
do.
Different
Yeah.
ballgame than it used to be. Look at what Ohio State did. Look at what they had to go through to do it. But again, I
And
sort of
all
go
it
back.
did, Larry, all it took was $20 million plus. It's not even that much money.
That's right.
Not even that much money.
But
Worth
you
it.
know what? But you know what, y'all, like? I mean, obviously that's the grand, obvious takeaway that everybody has. But look at how many schools out there also spent gobs of money on their
Sure.
roster and crashed and burned,
Mm,
Yeah.
or just didn't make the playoff,
right.
didn't achieve what they wanted to. It's more than just the money. You've got to have, the cultural parts, the buy-in, and the ability when you lose at Oregon and when you lose at home to Michigan and you got the flag planting and all that, the ability to pick everything back up and put the pieces together. And I know there are a lot of folks who just think Ryan Day is this evil, evil man, and Columbus is a crap hole, and Ohio State does nothing but, they're just bad people, whatever. In the real world, I think it is more than reasonable to say that money alone was not what delivered them a national championship. It was
For sure.
also chemistry stuff, the cultural stuff, the resilience stuff, and that's some of the same things that I think you can see as part of the foundation for what Clemson has at this early juncture in 2025, because a number of those guys could have gone.
Sure.
Absolutely. And that gets us back to what if, if Syracuse, if Miami beats Syracuse, and then there's this glum of 3 weeks, oh God, okay, preparing for the whatever, Pop-Tarts, Cheez-It, I don't know,
Mhm.
bowl nobody's excited about. Does that sort of negativity and sort of bad feeling, does that cause a couple of the, 2 or 3 more of those guys to be like, you know what, I'm gonna see what else is out there. And again, Clemson's spending money too, a lot of money, because Cade Klubnik is making substantially more as a result of what happened against SMU
Sure.
and Texas than he would have made, or than he was sort of not slotted, that he was scheduled to make going into those 2 games. So
That's interesting.
Clemson's not wrapping these guys up, on the basis of, hey, there's something in these hills.
Yeah.
They're using that, but it's also like it's negotiations.
The money in these hills too, baby.
Yeah.
The beauty of this podcast is that it all goes back to Syracuse, and that is just lovely, and a great way to wrap it up. But Larry, you mentioned that schedule. I mean, Syracuse on the schedule, SMU, Florida State, who the heck knows, South Carolina, and LSU. But what about the road games? At BC, at Georgia Tech, at Louisville, at Bill Belichick's Tar Heels. So it's going to be interesting. Y'all, if you do not subscribe to Tiger Illustrated, first of all, I'm shocked that you're even listening to this and you don't. Go subscribe. Be like my husband, who literally hangs on every word Larry says, and Paul. Shout out to Paul. And so make sure you do that. And Larry, we really appreciate you joining us again.
Can I give a shout out to the Daniel track team?
Sure. Hey. Yeah, your daughter, right?
Two daughters. One who's committed to run for Appalachian State.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So extremely proud. Yeah.
And they get that from you, Larry? They get their athleticism from you?
Not the athleticism, but I could run for days when I was on a basketball court. I wasn't very skilled, but I could run. I could play full court basketball for hours. So I guess something in the lungs, maybe. I don't know.
Amazing. You're the best, brother. Thank you for your time.
Y'all too. Thank y'all so much.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Thanks again to Larry Williams for joining us. Like I said, if you aren't already subscribed to Tiger Illustrated, I don't know what you're doing. You got to make sure you get on that train. Mac, we have a really busy week this week. We've got the Clemson episode. We've got Syracuse coming out with Brent Axe, who is the best as well, on Tuesday. But tomorrow, on Monday, we're going to put out a special schedule release episode. Mac will be doing some TV. We'll have an episode that'll go live right after Mac's done with TV. And we just got to get into these schedules because we were talking about this a little bit with Larry. I mean, Clemson's schedule, it looks a little more difficult than last year. Same with Syracuse, who we're going to talk about on Tuesday. Syracuse has a murderer's row. So we got to get into these schedules, Mac.
Yeah, we will. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Do you want to know them right now? Do you want me to tell you? Just kidding. We got to go. See y'all later. Tune in tomorrow. You can check it all out. Can't wait to break it down. It's going to be a lot of fun. Appreciate you guys always. Jump on the subscribe train. Hit the channel. Hit the notifications. You'll get an email. You'll get a pop-up every time our episodes go live. So we want y'all to hang out with us. Jump in the comments about this episode and what you think. If not, we will see you tomorrow. Appreciate you guys as always.